You ever seen a Montana blizzard up close? Not from the window of a warm cabin, but out there where the wind cuts through you like glass and the snow doesn't fall, it attacks. That kind of storm doesn't just test your body, it tests your soul. It was one of those nights, the kind where even the mountains seemed to disappear, swallowed whole by the storm. The sky and the ground had become the same endless white, and the only sound left in the world was the wind howling like it had lost something it loved. That's when she appeared. A German shepherd mother limping through the storm, her fur crusted with ice and dried blood. You could barely tell her color anymore, just black and tan under a skin of frost. Around her neck was a chain scar so deep it looked burned in. Someone had once owned her. Someone had once hurt her. But she wasn't thinking about that now. She had 2 newborn pups pressed against her ribs, tiny, trembling, barely hours old. And every step she took, she did it to keep them alive. Her name, though no one knew it yet, was Mara. The storm hit harder. Snow whipped sideways, biting at her face. Her front leg was broken. She dragged it through the drifts with a sound like sandpaper on metal. Every breath came out as steam, every exhale a small cloud of life. She found a hollow under a fallen spruce and curled herself around the pups. She licked them clean one by one, whispering in that silent, motherly way only animals understand. "Hold on, my loves. Just a little longer." One of the pups stopped moving before dawn. Mara nudged it once, twice, then laid her head down. The others still twitched, still fought. She wrapped her body tighter around that one, even as the cold crept deeper into her bones. Miles down the mountain, a rescue convoy was crawling through the storm engines, roaring low headlights, slicing tunnels in the white. They weren't soldiers on a mission this time. Just a handful of Marines sent to haul supplies and pull stranded families from the road. Leading them was Captain Owen Reeves, a quiet man in his 40s, lean-weathered, the kind of man who'd seen too many winters both on and off the battlefield. He had once worked with a canine partner named Rex. A shepherd, too. Rex had died in a roadside blast overseas, saving the rest of the patrol. Owen had carried his collar ever since, though he never talked about it. When the convoy hit a switchback covered in ice, they stopped to chain the tires. That's when it happened to sound. Faint. Too faint to be the wind. A cry so thin it barely existed. Sergeant Nick Alvarez, the youngest of the crew, froze. "You hear that?" Owen lifted his head. "Yeah." He opened the truck door and the cold hit them like a hammer. Snow blew sideways, blinding, relentless. But the sound came again, short, sharp, then gone. They grabbed ropes, flashlights, and started moving toward the timberline. The world narrowed to the beam of their lamps swirling with ice. Their boots sank deep into the drifts. And there, under a bent spruce, Owen saw it, a curve of fur, a shape that didn't belong to snow. He dropped to his knees. Mara was lying half buried, her chest rising barely an inch at a time. Her eyes opened when the light hit her, amber soft, unafraid. Between her paws, something moved. A tiny pup, breathing in ragged little bursts. Owen didn't say a word. He took off his glove and reached out slowly, letting her smell the back of his hand. She didn't growl. She didn't pull away. Instead, she lifted her head, pressed her nose against his palm, and exhaled a long, trembling sigh like a goodbye she'd been holding in all night. Then she lowered her muzzle over the pup one last time and went still. Nick whispered, "Is she?" Owen nodded once. "Yeah." He swallowed hard, then slid his jacket off, wrapping it around the tiny pup. The little thing whimpered alive, fighting. He looked down at Mara's frozen body, the snow already claiming her, and said softly, "You did your part, girl. Now we'll take it from here." When they lifted the pup, the storm screamed louder, as if it knew what it had lost. But the man and the pup kept moving, one heartbeat, carrying another through the cold. By the time they made it down the mountain, dawn had started to show, not bright, just a faint gray behind the storm, the kind that doesn't promise much. Inside the rescue tent, the air smelled like diesel heaters and wet wool. The men worked in silence, thawing their hands over a small burner when Captain Owen Reeves came in carrying that bundle in his jacket. He didn't say a word. He just laid it down on a blanket near the heat lamp. It was so small, barely the size of his hand. Its fur, still damp with melted snow, was tan around the muzzle and black along the spine, the markings of a shepherd. One of the medics leaned closer. That thing's still alive. Owen gave a slow nod. Barely. But it's fighting. And it was. Every breath came like a struggle, a soft whimper, a shake, a fight against the cold that had already taken its mother. Owen pulled a small tag from his pocket, a dog tag, the one he'd kept from his old partner Rex. He looked at it for a long time, the metal dull and worn. Then he slid it back into his jacket and said quietly, "Let's call him Finn." "Finn?" Nick asked. "Yeah," Owen said, eyes still on the pup, short for final chance. The men didn't argue. In that tent with the storm still clawing at the walls, it felt right. Dr. Emily Carter, the field veterinarian assigned to their unit, came in not long after. She was in her late 30s, strong but tired, the kind of woman who'd seen more pain than most men could stand. She had a scar along her wrist, a reminder of a rescue gone wrong years ago. She looked at the pup and frowned softly. "How long's he been out there?" "Long enough to lose everything," Owen said. Emily sighed and reached for her stethoscope. She moved gently, the way only people who've spent their lives with animals do. "Heart's weak," she murmured, "but steady." She set a heating pad under him, covered him with a foil blanket, and glanced toward Owen. "If he makes it through the night, he'll make it through anything." Owen nodded but didn't move. He just stood there, hands clasped, watching. He'd seen men die on foreign soil, seen dust storms and desert heat. But something about this little life hit deeper than all that. Because this was innocence fighting the kind of cold that no one deserves. Hours passed. The storm eased. The tent filled with the sound of melting snow dripping from canvas. The men came and went, bringing supplies, checking maps, trying not to look too long at the small bundle on the blanket. When Emily finally straightened up, she said, "He'll live." And for the first time in a long time, Owen Reeves smiled. But just a few tents over there was another story, one that hadn't found its ending yet. Emily walked down the narrow path between cots and crates, stopping at a quiet corner near the medical section. There behind a curtain lay another German shepherd. Her name was Sierra. Emily had rescued her 3 months earlier from a wrecked truck on the highway. The crash had killed the driver and Sierra's litter of puppies. She'd survived but barely, and ever since that night she hadn't eaten, hadn't barked, hadn't looked at anyone. Sierra just lay there, her head on her paws, eyes open but seeing nothing. She refused food, turned away from every hand that tried to help her. "She's been like this for weeks," the nurse whispered. Emily nodded. "I know. She's not dying of injury. She's dying of heartbreak." Outside, the wind had stopped howling. Inside, the tent grew quiet, so quiet that the sound of little Finn breathing could be heard across the room. Emily looked from the silent dog to the tiny one fighting to live, and whispered to herself, "Maybe one broken heart can fix another." That night, when most of the camp had gone to sleep, Owen stayed awake, sitting near the heater with Finn curled against his chest. The pup's warmth seeped through the fabric of his uniform, small but steady. He thought of the mother he'd buried under the spruce. He thought of his old partner Rex. And he thought of every promise he'd ever broken to himself, to the dogs he'd worked with, to the ones he couldn't save. As the last of the storm faded outside, Owen looked down at Finn and whispered, "Your mama did her job, kid. She saved you. Now it's our turn to make that mean something." He didn't know then that the pup in his arms would go on to change more than one life, that somewhere down the line he'd bring warmth back to a heart that had already gone cold. But sometimes the story starts right there, with one heartbeat refusing to quit. You know, people like to say, time heals everything. But I've learned time doesn't heal. It just makes room for the healing to begin, if you let it. That week after the storm, the camp started to thaw out 1 degree at a time. The sky over Montana turned a softer shade of gray, and the snow around the tents melted into slush that looked almost silver under the morning light. Inside the rescue compound, things felt different too, like the place was breathing again. Men were talking more, laughing a little louder, the kind of small noises that mean life is returning. And in the middle of it all was that little pup, Finn. He was getting stronger by the day, eating on his own now, his tiny tail twitching whenever someone said his name. He'd stumble over his paws, fall flat, then get right back up again, like he already knew what survival meant. Captain Owen Reeves spent every free moment with him. He'd talk to him in that quiet voice men use when they don't want anyone else to hear, the kind of talk that belongs more to ghosts than to the living. He'd say things like, "You're gonna grow strong, little guy," or "Your mama would be proud." And though Finn couldn't understand the words, he understood the tone. He always did. But a few tenths down, life wasn't stirring at all. It was silent, too silent. That was where Sierra lay. She was another shepherd, bigger than Finn's mother had been. Her fur, the same deep black and golden tan, though now dull with neglect. 3 months earlier, she'd been pulled from the wreck of a supply truck that had flipped on the icy highway. She'd survived the crash, but her pups hadn't. Since that day, she hadn't eaten more than a few bites, didn't bark, didn't move unless someone forced her to. She just stared, eyes open, empty, fixed on something no one else could see. Dr. Emily Carter had been trying everything. Special food, medicine, soft talk, even sleeping beside her crate on the worst nights, but nothing helped. The body was fine, the spirit was gone. That evening, Emily sat by Sierra again. The lantern flickered low, casting long shadows across the tent walls. Outside, the wind moaned through the pine trees. Emily took a slow breath and said softly, "You know, Sierra, you're not the only one who's lost somebody." Her hand rested gently on the dog's shoulder. The fur was coarse cold. "There's a little pup here," she continued. "Barely made it through the storm. Lost his mother, too. He's fighting, though. He doesn't know how to quit." Sierra didn't move, not even an ear twitch. But Emily kept talking anyway, because sometimes it's not about the words. It's about the sound of a heart trying to reach another one. Later that night, Owen came in holding Finn wrapped in his jacket. The pup was sleeping, his small body warm and steady. He looked at Sierra and frowned. "She still won't eat." Emily shook her head. "She's gone inside herself." Owen crouched down near the cage. He looked at Sierra for a long time, then said quietly, "That's what they do when the pain gets too big. They shut the world out." Emily glanced up. "You've seen it before." Owen nodded slowly. "Yeah. In men. In dogs. Doesn't matter which loss does the same thing to all of us." They sat there for a moment in silence, the kind that fills up a room when there's nothing left to say. Then Finn stirred in Owen's arms, letting out a soft, broken whine. Sierra's head lifted, just an inch. Her ears twitched. Emily noticed first. Her eyes widened. "Wait," she whispered. She heard him. Finn whimpered again, a tiny, tired cry. And for the first time in months, Sierra blinked. She turned her head slowly, as if dragging herself out of a long, dark sleep. Owen set Finn down on the blanket. The pup stumbled toward the cage, tripping over his own paw's tail, wagging weakly. He pressed his nose against the bars, a little squeak escaping his throat. Sierra leaned closer, nostrils flaring, breathing in the scent of new life. Something flickered behind those amber eyes, a memory maybe, or something older than memory. Emily whispered, "Easy, girl. It's okay." Then Sierra did something no one expected. She stood up. Shaky, slow, like a forgotten machine coming back to life. Her paws slid a little on the floor. She took one hesitant step forward, then another, until her nose touched Finn's tiny forehead. Finn licked her chin. Once. Twice. Sierra froze, then let out a low, trembling sound, half whimper, half sigh. Owen swallowed hard. "Let her out," he said. Emily hesitated, then unlatched the cage door. Sierra stepped out, not fast, not fierce, but alive. She nudged Finn with her nose, then did something even more extraordinary. She lay down beside him, curling her body around his small frame, just the way Mara had done in the snow. Emily covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God." Owen's voice was low, almost reverent. "Looks like that pup just gave her a reason to stay." And that's how it started, the second chance neither of them had asked for, but both of them needed. Because sometimes healing doesn't arrive in miracles or medicine. Sometimes it walks in on 4 wobbly legs and reminds you that love still knows the way home. You ever notice how the quiet moments always come right before something changes? That's how it was at Snowfield Base in those first days after the blizzard, quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of peace that feels like the world holding its breath. The storm had passed, the sun was out, and the whole camp had turned from white to gold. Snow dripped from the tents in long threads, and the pines on the ridge glittered like glass. It almost looked beautiful again, almost. Inside the medical tent, Dr. Emily Carter sat on a crate, her coffee gone cold, staring at the two German shepherds who now occupied her world. One was Sierra, older, weary, still more ghost than dog. The other was Finn, small, clumsy, full of new life that didn't understand loss yet. They were opposites in every way, but grief and hope often share the same room. Finn had been growing fast. The little guy could already stand on shaky legs, tail flicking like a twig in the wind. He'd stumble, fall, then climb again, always reaching for something, a hand, a bowl, a bit of light. He had no idea how much weight his tiny heartbeat carried. And Sierra, she'd started moving again too. Not much, but enough. She ate a few bites of food each day. She watched the world outside her cage. Sometimes she even sniffed at the air when someone new walked by, as if testing if it was safe to care again. Every evening, Emily would open Sierra's cage and let Finn wander close. The pup always went straight for her, no hesitation, no fear. He'd press his nose into her fur paw, at her tail, fall asleep against her chest. And Sierra, instead of turning away, began to nudge him closer. It was slow, almost sacred, that shift from emptiness to connection. You could feel it in the room, the kind of quiet warmth that doesn't come from heaters or blankets, but from the simple act of being needed again. Captain Owen Reeves came by one night after patrol. His boots were still muddy, his face red from the cold. He stood in the doorway watching them. Sierra curled around Finn like a tired guardian, Emily sitting cross-legged on the floor beside them. The lantern light turned everything gold. He said softly, "She's coming back." Emily didn't look up. Yeah, because of him. Owen knelt beside her, elbows on his knees. "You think dogs know when someone's broken?" Emily smiled faintly. "I think they know before we do." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Outside, wind whispered across the snowfields, and inside, two hearts, one scarred, one new, kept time together. After a while, Finn stirred and tried to climb over Sierra's leg. She lifted her head and gave a low, patient huff, the sound every mother makes when her kids got more spirit than sense. The pup froze, then wagged his tail as if he'd just been praised. Owen chuckled quietly. "Look at that. She's already teaching him manners." Emily nodded. Maybe he's teaching her how to live. There was something about the scene that caught Owen in the chest. Maybe it was the way Sierra's eyes softened when she looked at the pup. Maybe it was how Finn leaned into her without question, like love was the most natural thing in the world. Or maybe it was because Owen had seen that same look once before in his old partner Rex, when the dog had chosen to protect him instead of himself. He cleared his throat and stood. "Keep me posted, Doc. That little one's special." Emily looked up. "They both are." As he walked out into the cold night, Owen glanced back once. Through the flap of the tent, he saw them lying together, Sierra and Finn, one heart teaching the other how to beat again. And you know, in that wild Montana winter, surrounded by soldiers and silence, that small circle of warmth was maybe the only thing keeping the cold from winning. Because sometimes love doesn't need to speak. Sometimes it just needs a place to breathe. You could feel it before you saw it, that quiet change in the air around the base. Snowfield had been a place of duty, discipline, survival. But ever since that little pup came along, something softer had moved in too. It started in the mornings. You'd hear it before sunrise, the scratch of paws against canvas, the soft shuffle of boots outside the medical tent. Marines who used to walk with their heads down now stopped by just to check in. "How's the little guy doing today, Doc?" they'd ask. Emily would smile, hand resting on her coffee mug. Still fighting, still hungry. Then, like clockwork, Finn would stumble out from behind Sierra's cot tail, wagging paws too big for his body, tripping over the blanket every few steps. And behind him, always a few seconds later, came Sierra. Her limp had grown less pronounced, her eyes brighter. She moved slower than most dogs, but there was something noble about it, like she'd decided that life, despite everything, was still worth showing up for. By the end of that week, everyone on base knew their story. The Marines called them the second chance pair. Owen Reeves didn't correct it. He just nodded every time he heard it because he knew that's exactly what they were. Some nights after the day's work was done, Owen would stop by the tent and sit with them. No words, just the soft hum of the heater, the crackle of frost melting off his boots, and the steady rhythm of breathing one man, one old dog, one young pup. He'd scratch behind Sierra's ears and say quietly, "You did good today, girl. You kept him alive and he's keeping you going. Fair trade, huh?" Sierra would look up at him with those amber eyes, deep, calm, forgiving, and he'd swear she understood. Dr. Emily Carter had changed too. There was a light in her face again, not the hard, tired kind that came from years of war medicine, but something gentler. Every time she checked on them, you could see it, that faint smile, the way her voice softened. "Come on, Sierra." Just a little more food, she'd coax, and Sierra would obey, slow and steady. Finn would follow suit, nibbling at whatever his mother figure left behind. Nick Alvarez, the young sergeant, started dropping by as well. He'd sneak in scraps from the mess hall, bits of bread, a slice of ham, sometimes even a cookie or two. "Don't tell the captain," he'd whisper, and Emily would roll her eyes. But she never stopped him. Every visit ended the same, with Sierra nudging Finn toward whoever was near like a proud mom introducing her kid to the world. It didn't matter that she wasn't his real mother. Love doesn't check for bloodlines. It just recognizes itself when it finds a home. One evening, the wind was howling hard outside, shaking the canvas walls. The kind of night that would make most folks crawl deeper under their blankets and pray for morning. But inside that tent, the world felt almost sacred. Owen, Emily, and Nick sat around a small heater sipping instant coffee. Finn was asleep, sprawled across Sierra's paws, one ear twitching every time the wind moaned. Sierra's chest rose and fell in a slow, peaceful rhythm. Owen looked at them for a long while before speaking. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think miracles were the kind of thing that happened once in a lifetime. Big, loud, unforgettable. But this?" He nodded toward the two shepherds. "This is quieter. But it's just as real." Emily smiled. "Sometimes the smallest lives hold the biggest lessons." Nick grinned. "Yeah. Like, don't mess with Doc's coffee." The three of them laughed low and tired, the kind of laugh that feels more like a sigh than a sound. Outside, snow started falling again, but gentler this time, more forgiving. It tapped softly against the tent like fingers on a drum. Sierra shifted, resting her head on Finn's back. The pup stirred, made a small noise, and fell back asleep. Emily whispered, "You see that? That's trust." Owen nodded. "That's what saves us every time." For a long moment, no one spoke. The tent glowed warm from the lantern light, and the three of them sat there, not as soldiers, not as medics, but as witnesses to something pure. Because in a world full of chaos and cold, sometimes all it takes is a heartbeat against another to remind you that warmth still exists. And in that tiny shelter at the edge of the Montana wilderness, warmth had found its way back in fur and breath and love reborn. There's a saying out here in Montana, "The mountains give and the mountains take." When you live this close to nature, you learn that peace never lasts forever. Sometimes the wind turns and the quiet that kept you safe becomes the same thing that tests your heart. It was early spring when it happened. The snow had melted down the ridgelines and the pine needles shimmered with dew again. Sierra was walking better now, slow, steady, her limp hardly noticeable. Finn had grown into a sturdy little pup, all long legs and curiosity, his ears finally standing tall. Most mornings you'd see them outside the tents, Sierra lying in the sun, Finn tumbling through the slush, chasing whatever dared to move. The base had changed because of them. Men smiled more, talked softer. There was life here now, the kind that made you forget for a moment what the uniform was for. But peace, like snow, has a way of melting when you least expect it. That morning started quiet, too quiet. The air was heavy still, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Then the smell came, faint at first, then sharper. Smoke. It drifted down from the southern ridge like a warning written in the wind. Owen Reeves was the first to notice. He'd been out near the motor pool tightening the snow chains on a truck that hadn't been used in weeks. He stopped, lifted his head, and saw it, a thin gray column rising between the trees. Within an hour, the sky had turned a strange copper color, the sun a dull coin behind the haze. Wildfire, Nick Alvarez said, jogging up beside him. Yeah, Owen replied, jaw tight. Too close for comfort. By noon, the radio was alive with static and orders. The fire had started from a lightning strike in the southern valley, a dry patch of pine catching faster than anyone thought possible. Local families were trapped down by the river bend, the roads cut off by falling trees. Evacuation detail, the dispatcher barked. Sector C through F immediate. Owen didn't hesitate. Gear up. We're taking Unit 2. The camp turned electric with motion men shouting, trucks revving, equipment clanging. Dr. Emily Carter was already on her radio organizing a triage line near the medical tent. She caught Owen's arm as he passed. You can't go without extra oxygen, those valleys choke out fast. He nodded. We'll be fine. She didn't believe him, but she let him go anyway. That's what happens when you've worked around people who run toward danger instead of away from it. You stop arguing. You just pray faster. Outside, Sierra and Finn were tethered near the supply crates, watching everything unfold. Finn barked once sharp and high, the kind of bark that means, don't leave me. Sierra stood still, nose tilted toward the smoke. She could smell it, taste it, feel it deep in the bones that had once known fear. Emily crouched beside her, one hand on her collar. Stay here, girl. He'll come back. But the shepherd's eyes said otherwise. They always did. The trucks rolled out in a line, engines roaring, tires chewing mud. Owen led the convoy, Nick beside him, maps spread across the dash. The smoke thickened as they climbed toward the ridge, turning daylight into an orange dusk. Ash drifted through the air like black snow. By the time they reached the southern valley, the world was burning. Flames crawled up tree trunks like hungry fingers. The sound wasn't a crackle, it was a roar, low and endless, like the breath of something ancient and angry. They found the first group of civilians near a fallen pickup. 2 adults and a teenager coughing, eyes wide with panic. Owen and Nick got them to safety wrapped in blankets, voices calm but firm. Keep breathing, Owen said. We've got you. Then over the roar of the fire came another sound, high-pitched, desperate, not human. Owen froze. You hear that? Nick nodded. Yeah. Sounds like an animal. Owen finished. He turned toward the trees where the smoke was thickest. Stay with the truck, he ordered, but before Nick could argue, he was already moving. He didn't see her at first, just flashes of tan and black between the flames. Then the shape came into view, Sierra. She'd followed them. Her coat was streaked with soot, her collar burned from the heat. And beside her, tangled in a mess of barbed wire, was a small deer fawn, thrashing and crying in panic. Owen's breath caught. Oh no, Sierra. She wasn't running from the fire, she was fighting it. She barked once, sharp and furious, lunging toward the trapped animal. Every instinct in her body screamed to flee, but she didn't. Not this time. Nick came running up behind. Captain, what the hell? Get the extinguisher, Owen yelled. Nick yanked the canister from his pack, spraying the ground to keep the fire from closing in. Owen dropped to his knees beside the fawn, knife in hand, cutting through the wire. The metal burned hot, the air thick with smoke. Sierra stayed close, barking, snapping at the flames like she could scare them away. When the last strand broke, the fawn stumbled free, wide-eyed and trembling. It looked back once, then bounded downhill toward the river, vanishing into the smoke. Owen grabbed Sierra by the collar. Come on, girl, we're done here. She resisted for half a heartbeat, looking after the fawn, then turned and followed. A burning branch crashed nearby, sparks scattering across the dirt. The heat was unbearable now. Owen's sleeve caught a flame. He slapped it out with his gloved hand. They ran, stumbling, coughing, half blind. The fire chased them all the way to the trucks. When they finally broke through the line of smoke, the air hit cold again. Sierra collapsed against Owen's legs, panting hard, her fur singed black in spots. Nick dropped to one knee beside them, coughing. She saved that thing, didn't she? Owen nodded, still catching his breath. Yeah, she saved it. He looked down at her, the same dog who'd once refused to eat, who'd chosen to lie down and wait for death. Now she'd run into fire to save a life that wasn't even hers to save. He stroked her head gently, voice rough. That's what mothers do. The wind shifted again, carrying the smoke north toward the base. And far behind them the valley kept burning, its echo rolling through the mountains like thunder. The thing about fire is it doesn't care. Doesn't care who's good, who's bad, who's ready, or who's not. It just takes what it can reach, and it keeps moving. By the time Owen Reeves and Sergeant Nick Alvarez got Sierra back to the convoy, the fire had turned wild. It wasn't just burning trees anymore, it was devouring the valley. Flames leapt 30 feet high, tearing across the ridge like a living storm. Every gust of wind sent sparks flying, each one carrying the promise of another blaze. Owen laid Sierra down beside the truck, hands shaking from exhaustion. Her chest was heaving, fur blackened in patches, one paw burned raw. "Stay with me, girl," he said, his voice rough from smoke. "You did good. You hear me? You did good." Nick coughed hard, pulling his mask off for air. "Captain, those families by the river, they're not out yet. Command says we got 3 more. Owen wiped soot from his eyes. "Then we go back." Nick hesitated. "Sir, we barely made it out alive." Owen's jaw clenched. "And someone out there won't make it if we wait." He turned toward Sierra, kneeling beside her one more time. Her eyes were half closed, her breathing shallow. She tried to lift her head when she saw him stand as if to follow. "No," he said softly. "You've done enough. Stay here. Rest." He pressed his forehead to hers just for a second. Then he grabbed his gear and ran back into the smoke. Nick swore under his breath but followed. That's the thing about loyalty. It doesn't need orders. The world beyond the tree line was unrecognizable. Everything glowed the color of molten iron. Ash fell like snow, stinging their faces. The ground cracked under their boots, hot enough to make the soles smoke. They moved fast, using what little visibility they had left. Through the haze, Owen spotted movement near an overturned jeep, 3 figures huddled together, waving weakly. "Over here," he shouted, voice swallowed by the roar. The 2 men and a woman stumbled forward, coughing, eyes streaming. One of them, a teenage boy, was limping badly. Nick threw a blanket over him, guiding him toward the path. Owen took the lead, shouting over the flames, "Follow my light! Keep moving!" But just as they reached the clearing, the wind shifted. A wall of fire rolled down the slope like a red ocean, swallowing everything in its path. "Go! Go!" Owen yelled. Nick pushed the civilians ahead, half carrying the boy. Owen stayed back, scanning for any stragglers. That's when he heard it again. That same cry. That same sound Sierra had followed before. High-pitched, scared, alive. He spun around. "You've got to be kidding me." Through the smoke, a small silhouette darted between burning trunks. A dog, maybe someone's pet from the valley homes, small and wild-eyed, trapped behind a ring of flame. Owen didn't even think. He ran. The heat was unbearable now, the kind that sears your throat and blinds your eyes. He leapt a burning log, landed hard, nearly fell. The pup was crying, trapped under a tangle of brush. He yanked his jacket off, beat down the flames, and reached in. The little thing bit him hard, but he didn't stop. "Easy," he rasped. "It's all right. You're coming with me." He wrapped the pup in his jacket and turned back toward the road, but the fire was faster. Trees were collapsing. Embers rained down like stars. There was no way through. Then, through the noise, he heard another sound. A bark, low, hoarse, and coming closer. He turned. Out of the smoke came Sierra. She'd followed him. Her coat was blackened, her steps uneven, but her eyes, those eyes were alive. She barked again, circling to his left. Her nose pointing toward a gap between 2 fallen pines, a narrow tunnel of dirt and ash. Owen stared. "You've got to be kidding me again." But she barked once more, short and sharp like a command. He didn't argue. He followed. Together they crawled through the gap. Owen clutching the small dog in his arms, Sierra pushing behind him, her breath hot and ragged. The tunnel opened out onto the old firebreak road, blackened but clear. Nick was waiting there, shouting, "Captain, over here!" Owen stumbled forward, coughing, eyes watering. He dropped to one knee, still holding the bundle. The rescued pup wriggled, whined, then licked his wrist. Nick stared at Sierra, stunned. "How the hell did she—" "She found the way out," Owen said, voice hoarse. He looked down at her again. Sierra was standing barely. Her chest rose once, twice, then slower. Her fur was singed, her sides streaked with ash and blood. He knelt beside her. Hey, hey, stay with me, girl. Her eyes lifted, finding his face. In them was that same look he'd seen the night Finn met her, the look of someone who had already made peace with what she was meant to do. Her tail twitched once barely. Then she let her head rest against his knee. Owen's voice broke. You don't get to leave yet. You hear me? You don't. But the fire had already burned its course. Sierra closed her eyes, her breath fading like the last light of a lantern in the wind. Nick stood back silent, helmet in his hands. When the radios finally crackled with the order to pull out, no one moved. They just stood there watching the smoke drift over the ridge, the sound of crackling fading to nothing. Owen lifted Sierra's body himself, wrapped in his own jacket. He carried her back through the ash-covered road, step by slow step, like a soldier bringing home one of his own. When they reached the base, the sky was still glowing red behind them, and that little rescued pup, still alive, still trembling, watched him the whole way as if it understood what had been lost, so it could live. There are some silences you never forget. Not the peaceful kind, not the silence of snow or night, but the kind that follows something breaking. The kind that sits in your chest and stays there. That's what Snowfield Base sounded like when they came back from the fire. The trucks rolled in slow engines, humming low. Nobody talked. The men who'd been shouting hours ago now moved like shadows, faces blackened by soot, eyes red from smoke. And at the front of it all walked Captain Owen Reeves, his jacket wrapped around what looked like a bundle of fur. He didn't stop at the checkpoint, didn't report in, didn't say a word. He just kept walking straight to the small open space behind the medical tent, the one spot where the snow hadn't melted yet, where the mountains still kept a little quiet for themselves. Dr. Emily Carter met him halfway. One look at his face told her everything. She didn't ask, didn't need to. The men stood back as Owen knelt, laying Sierra's body gently in the snow. Even covered in ash, she still looked noble, her muzzle streaked with gray, her paws curled like she'd simply fallen asleep. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. "Oh, Sierra." Owen's voice came out raw. "She saved another one, ran back into that fire." He nodded toward the small bundle Nick was holding, the stray pup trembling but alive. Emily wiped her face, shaking her head. She just couldn't stop saving things, could she? "No," Owen said softly. "Guess some hearts don't know when to quit." For a long moment no one moved. The air smelled of smoke and pine sap and snow. Then Owen took a breath, steady but breaking. "We'll bury her here. She deserves to stay where she fought." The men nodded. Without orders, they began to dig, using shovels, helmets, bare hands, whatever they had. The ground was hard, half frozen, but nobody complained. The sound of metal striking ice echoed through the mountains like a slow heartbeat. Finn watched from the corner of the tent. He was bigger now, a few months old, but still clumsy, still innocent. When he saw Sierra lying there, he whimpered and took a step forward. Emily tried to stop him, but Owen shook his head. "Let him come." Finn padded through the snow tail, low ears pinned back. He nudged Sierra's muzzle with his nose, then rested his head on her chest, waiting for a breath that didn't come. The sight of it broke something in everyone there. Nick turned away, eyes glassy. Emily crouched down, one hand on Finn's back. "She's gone, sweetheart," she whispered. "She did what mothers do." When the hole was ready, Owen lifted Sierra one last time. He laid her down carefully, wrapping her in a folded blanket, and placed her collar on top. The firelight caught on the metal, burned bent but still shining. He stood there for a long time, shoulders straight, head bowed. Then in that low voice that carried both command and sorrow, he said, "Rest easy, girl. You did your duty, and then some." The first shovel of earth fell soft, then another and another. When it was done, Owen planted a wooden marker at the head of the grave. It read, "Sierra. She saved more than lives. She saved hearts." The mountains went still again. Even the wind seemed to pause. Later that night, after the others had gone, Owen sat alone by the grave. The rescued pup, the small one Sierra had died for, lay curled in his lap. Finn sat close, head resting on Owen's boot, eyes fixed on the fresh mound of snow. Emily found him there near midnight. She didn't speak, just set down a small metal dish filled with warm broth. "She'd want you to keep feeding them," she said softly. Owen nodded. "Yeah, she would." For a while they just sat there in the cold, 2 people and 2 dogs, all of them carrying the same quiet ache. After a long silence, Emily said, "You know, I never told you what she was like before you found Finn. She wouldn't move, wouldn't eat. I thought she'd given up." She looked toward the grave. But that pup brought her back, made her remember what it meant to care again. Owen looked down at Finn, who was licking the small stray's ear, gentle and patient. "She didn't just remember," he said. "She passed it on." Emily smiled through the tears. "Guess that's how mercy works, huh? It doesn't die with us. It just finds another way to live." Owen nodded slowly, staring at the horizon where the last glow of fire still burned faint on the ridge. "Yeah," he murmured, "and sometimes it looks like a shepherd." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke and snow, the memory of fire, and the promise of spring tangled together. Finn lifted his head and barked once toward the dark, short and steady, as if answering someone only he could see, and for just a second Owen could have sworn he heard it, a faint echo carried by the wind, a single bark, deeper, older, fading into the night, Sierra's voice saying goodbye. Spring doesn't arrive all at once in the Montana high country. It doesn't burst in with flowers and green hills like people imagine. No, it creeps in quietly, one drop of meltwater, one bird call, one patch of earth that finally gives up its frost. That's how it was the weeks after Sierra's burial. The snow thinned, the wind softened, and little by little the camp began to feel alive again. Captain Owen Reeves still carried the weight of that fire in his chest. He'd seen too many good souls, both human and animal, fall in the line of duty. But losing Sierra had been different. It wasn't just a loss. It was a reminder, a mirror held up to the kind of courage that doesn't wear rank or uniform. Every morning he'd stop by the small wooden cross on the ridge, Sierra's resting place. The snow there melted first. Maybe it was the way the sun hit that spot. Maybe it was something else. He'd brush the frost from the marker, mutter a few words, then walk back to the base with 2 pups trailing at his heels. Finn had grown fast. He wasn't the tiny, trembling thing from the storm anymore. His legs were long now, his ears finally stood tall, and his eyes had taken on that deep, steady look of a shepherd who's seen more than his years, but his heart that stayed soft. And the little stray Sierra had saved Owen named her Willow. She was smaller, wiry, with light brown fur and white paws. Quick, curious, always shadowing Finn's every move. The 2 were inseparable. If Finn stopped to drink, Willow drank. If Finn chased a falling leaf, Willow was right behind, tumbling over her own feet. Sometimes when Owen watched them from his tent door, he'd catch himself smiling without meaning to. It felt like the first real smile he'd had since before the fire. Dr. Emily Carter saw it too. One evening she caught him leaning against the fence, watching the dogs chase each other in the thawing field. "They're doing all right," she said. Owen nodded. "They're doing what Sierra taught them to keep going." Emily looked out at the horizon where the mountains were shedding their winter coats. "You ever think about how animals forgive faster than people?" He chuckled softly. "All the time." She folded her arms. "Maybe that's why we need them." Finn barked, then running full speed toward Owen, Willow close behind. They skidded to a stop in the mud, splattering his boots. Owen pretended to scold them. "You 2 trying to redecorate my uniform?" Finn wagged his tail. Willow barked back, high, playful. Emily laughed. "They're not redecorating. They're reminding you you're alive." Owen looked down at the 2 of them, muddy and panting, and smiled. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Guess they are." Over the next weeks, Owen started training them, nothing serious at first, just simple commands: sit, stay, heel. But Finn was different. He learned faster than Owen expected. His focus, his patience, it reminded him of Rex, his old partner. When Owen called, Finn would stop mid-run and turn instantly, waiting for the next word. And Willow, though clumsy, followed right after him, mimicking every move. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the pines, Owen took them both out beyond the wire fence. The ground was soft, the air still heavy with the scent of thawing pine and wet earth. He stopped by the small hill overlooking the valley and sat down in the grass. Finn came to his right, Willow to his left. Both sat close, leaning into him. "You know," Owen said softly, "Sierra would have liked you too. She was tough, just like you. but she had a heart that wouldn't quit. Finn tilted his head, listening. Willow pawed at his boot. He smiled. "You're her legacy, both of you." Emily's voice came from behind. "Talking to dogs again, Captain." He grinned over his shoulder. "Only the ones that listen better than most people." She walked up beside him, arms folded. "That's a low bar." He laughed. "You'd be surprised how many fail it." They stood there together for a long while, watching the valley. The fire had scarred the land, black streaks still marked the hillside, but already new green was pushing through the ash. Emily said quietly, "It's healing." Owen nodded. "We all are." When the sun finally set, he gathered the dogs and headed back down the hill. Finn trotted proudly ahead, ears perked, tail wagging. Willow followed close, tripping over a rock, rolling once, then hopping back up like nothing happened. Owen watched them and shook his head, smiling. "You two are trouble," he said softly. But his voice had that tone, that mix of pride and affection that only comes from someone who's learned the hard way how rare second chances are. And that night, as the camp settled under a calm, starry sky, Owen whispered a quiet prayer, not for safety, not for luck, but for gratitude. Because somehow through all the loss, life had found a way to bloom again. Sometimes that's all you can ask for, a new season, a clean breath, and the weight of spring reminding you that nothing stays broken forever. By the time summer found the Montana Valley, everything had changed. The rivers ran wide again, carrying melted snow from the high peaks. The smell of pine and fresh soil hung in the air, and the scars of the wildfire were fading into green. Even the old barracks at Snowfield Base, once wrapped in frost and fear, now stood quiet under a gentler sun. But the biggest change wasn't in the land. It was in the people and in the dogs that had become part of their lives. Finn, now nearly grown, had turned into a strong young shepherd, sleek, sharp, calm when he needed to be fearless, when he didn't. He carried himself the way Sierra once had, watchful, loyal, always ready to protect something that mattered. And little Willow had grown too still, smaller, still full of mischief, but quicker and braver than anyone expected. She followed Finn everywhere, copying his every move, as if she believed that if she just stayed close enough, she'd inherit some of his strength. In a way, she had. Every morning before the camp came alive, Captain Owen Reeves walked the field with the two of them. He'd carry his coffee, watch the sun climb over the ridge, and whistle softly, one short, one long. Finn would come running, Willow right behind, and the three of them would move through that open land like a single rhythm. A man and his dogs, nothing fancy, nothing heroic, just right. One morning as they reached the ridge above the valley, Owen stopped. The wind brushed through the tall grass, carrying the faint hum of summer insects and faraway river song. From where he stood, he could still see the old burn lines cutting through the trees, dark reminders of what had been lost. But there was green now, and birds, and life. He crouched down, resting a hand on each dog. "You two see that," he said softly. "That's what healing looks like. Doesn't happen fast, doesn't happen easy. But it happens." Finn tilted his head as if listening. Willow pressed her nose to his knee. Owen smiled. "You know, Sierra would have loved this spot. She'd probably lie right there in the grass, watching you two make fools of yourselves." He paused, looking toward the horizon where the sky met the mountains. "And I think she'd be proud." Dr. Emily Carter joined him a few minutes later, a thermos in one hand, her parka draped over her shoulder. "You always talk to them like they understand," she teased gently. He chuckled. "Who says they don't?" She handed him a cup of coffee, then nodded toward the open field below. "Command's been asking what your plans are. You ever think of training them officially?" Owen raised an eyebrow. "You mean turn these two into working dogs?" "Not just working dogs," she said. "Search and rescue. You've already done half the training without trying." He looked at Finn, sitting tall and alert beside him, then at Willow, who was gnawing proudly on a pine cone like she'd just saved the world. He smiled. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe it's time to give them a job." Emily nodded. They'd honor her that way. He knew exactly who she meant. That afternoon, Owen started their training in earnest voice commands, scent work, rescue drills. It was slow at first, clumsy even, but there was something pure about it. The way Finn would sprint ahead on command, nose low to the ground, then circle back when he found what he was meant to. The way Willow would wait behind tail wagging as if to say, "I'll take the next one." Day after day, the rhythm became a ritual, man, dog, and pup learning each other's hearts through work and patience. And sometimes in the evenings when the drills were done and the air cooled, Owen would sit with them near Sierra's grave under the apple tree that had survived the fire. He'd pour a little water into a tin bowl, sip his coffee, and say softly, "You see this girl? Your family's still growing. You did that." The dogs would lie beside him, heads on his boots, eyes half closed, and for a moment the world would feel whole again. Word spread across the nearby towns about the shepherd and her pups, about how one dog had run into fire to save a life and how her legacy now trained to save others. Folks came by sometimes bringing their kids their own dogs or just to see what hope looked like when it grew fur and barked at butterflies. And you know something? Hope really did bark. It barked in two voices, one deep, one high, echoing across the meadow on every golden evening. By the end of that summer, Snowfield Base had a new kind of reputation. Not for its drills or its gear, but for its heart. Every soldier there could tell you about Sierra the dog who'd saved them as much as they'd saved her. And every one of them knew that when the next storm came or the next mountain called, they wouldn't be going alone. Because in this world, sometimes salvation doesn't wear a uniform. Sometimes it walks on four legs with fur that smells like smoke and eyes that remember everything worth saving. That's how Owen Reeves, Finn, and Willow lived from then on. Not chasing glory, not chasing redemption, just carrying it quietly step for step across the wide Montana fields. And every evening when the sun slipped low and the light turned honey gold, you could see them walking toward the ridge, a man and two dogs, silhouettes against the sky. The promise of summer in every step. The proof of love in every breath. And somewhere in the hush between wind and grass, the faintest echo of Sierra's bark, still watching, still guarding, still home.